Hello and a very warm welcome to this special edition of Design Date. I'm Claire German, Managing Director at Design Centre Chelsea Harbour. In this virtual format, we're keeping our community engaged and inspired wherever they are. We're bringing together designers and industry insiders for some great conversations online. These webinars shine a light on creative partnerships, but today's session is particularly apt as it coincides with Connected, an exhibition of highly imaginative and beautiful furniture which is on here in the Design Avenue. It is simply astonishing what can be achieved when designers and makers work together, even at distance during lockdown. Gathering a lot of attention is a stunning piece in American maple by Heatherwick Studio, and I'm simply delighted to introduce its founder, award-winning designer Thomas Heatherwick. He is joined by Sean Sutcliffe, co-founder and MD of Benchmark Furniture, and David Venables, European Director for the American Hardwood Export Council, who work closely on the Connected project. And who better to moderate the session than Grant Gibson? With so much to discuss, there may not be time for questions and answers, so without further ado, I'm handing over to Grant, and thank you all for tuning in.
Hello and welcome to Creativity, Sustainability and Craftsmanship. My name is Grant Gibson. I'm a writer and podcaster, and this is a panel discussion that has been born out of the Connected project, which is currently on display at Design Centre Chelsea Harbour. There are people on the panel who are going to talk in more depth about the project, but suffice to say that Connected was organised by the American Hardwood Export Council, which asked 9 international designers to create a table and a seat for their own homes during the first lockdown. The pieces would all be made by the high-end furniture company Benchmark out of 3 timbers, red oak, cherry and maple. The twist being that none of the designers could visit the workshop. Instead, all communication had to be done over digital platforms like Zoom. Today, as the title suggests, the plan is to talk about the creativity and the craftsmanship behind the scheme, but we also want to pick up on the importance of sustainability to the whole endeavour. And to help me do this, I have an excellent panel. In no particular order, I'm joined by renowned designer Thomas Heatherwick, who created the extraordinary STEM system for the project, co-founder of Benchmark Sean Sutcliffe, and AHEC's own David Venables. Hello, chaps. Thanks very much for joining us. How are we? David, can we kick off with you? It'd be good if you could provide viewers with a bit of a top line on the project.
The project came about through some discussions at the beginning of lockdown with Sean at Benchmark, and we've worked with Sean on a number of creative projects before, and through that process we established that you could take designs to fruition remotely. That was going to be the first challenge. The workshop was going to stay open, and we created a partnership with the design. And once all those pieces were in place, a lot of energy was generated to reach out to some of the best design minds in Europe and see if we could connect all those countries and designers in a common brief, which was very much about designing something for home living, working, which we saw as relevant then and became much more relevant as lockdown went on and the pandemic. We realized that, you know, it was going to be around with us for a lot longer than we perhaps originally thought. Our reason for doing the project was to get shine a light really on 3 really important timber species that are an essential mix of the forest. So they're 40% of all the hardwood trees in the vast North American hardwood forests. And it was that sustainability, you know, that issue of sustainability that drives us to promote these timbers, but also they're just fantastic materials for furniture and product design. And that was the real thinking, you know, behind that's how the whole project started.
I mean, it's quite intriguing. The red oak, the cherry and the maple, not necessarily fashionable timbers at the moment. I'm wondering if we can put our finger on why.
I think there are many reasons. I mean, what determines fashion in product design and architecture might be different overall as to what determines it in wood. We see different wood species coming around in cycles. Not all those timbers have been underused forever or never seen before. You know, those of us of a certain age, you know, remember strong fashions and, you know, products coming out in maple, cherry some years ago. I think they've been kind of forgotten in the current mix. There's a lot of attention on oak, and so we've introduced another oak because there's no doubt there is some supply stress. You know, if you put all your focus, this is a natural raw material supply. This is nature naturally regenerating its forests. Nature dictates what materials you've got to work with, and if they weren't top materials for product and furniture design, there would be no point in doing these projects. So it's a whole combination of factors.
So Sean, David alluded to the fact that you've worked with AHEC before on various other projects. I mean, what do you get? What does Benchmark get from a project like this, I wonder?
I think what we get is a kind of shot in the arm of new creative challenges, to work with 9 designers, some of whom we knew, many of whom we didn't, on what was actually a really quite a new challenge. Each of these designers was faced with a situation that they hadn't faced before, of being in homes and finding the inadequacy of of their home for the purpose of working. So that was new. And then what was also new, obviously, and a good learning curve for us was extending the remit of some digital communication over design, and where it works and where it doesn't. And, you know, in some aspects it works brilliantly, but in some aspects it falls short. So
that begs the question, where does it fall short?
Well, I think it falls short. I mean, there are obvious things that it falls short on, which is things like colour. You know, you can't get colour, you can't get texture. Colour's really poor on screens because they're so varied, and texture obviously doesn't translate at all. But then there are more subtle things about just scale. You know, there's a sense of scale we get only when we stand in proximity to something. It doesn't translate over a screen that's 10 inches by 9 inches, whatever. You know, and I think that one of the things that we noticed was when the designers who have seen their pieces at the design museum got to see them, they were kind of, oh wow, it's bigger than I thought. And almost universally, they all thought it was bigger than they'd imagined it. So, you know, you can look at a drawing, you can see the dimensions, but until you stand close to it. So there's something about proximity to human being. And then there's obviously there are things like, you know, the comfort factor of it, that you know, the designers were simply having to take our word, because normally a design would sit extensively in a product. You know,
well, that was something I was keen to pick up on, because you've talked in the past about the workshop having to take more responsibility because of the digital method of communication. Can we unpick that? What does that mean?
It definitely more responsibility. There has to be a greater leap of trust from the designer, and you know, more trust has to go into the craftsman, because there are things that the designer can't experience for themselves. They're just going to have to trust the craftsman's eye, the craftsman's experience, and that calls for a really kind of close relationship. It calls for a leap of trust that we're not going to try and take shortcuts. We're not going to try and sort of shortchange the process by making an argument that just makes things more convenient for ourselves. That we want the best out of this as well, but actually, hey guys, listen, it really isn't that comfortable. We need to tilt it forward more. We need to move the back. We need to make it lower. We need to add more texture to this. It's not exciting my fingers. You know, I'm not getting that sort of haptic excitement that I want. So there are things that, and in a way that's really exciting for the craftsman, because it gives us more of what I suppose historically we used to have. On the other hand, we do miss people visiting the workshop. You know, we used to love people coming to the workshop. And now, you know, they're few and far between.
Thomas, this issue of trust is quite an interesting one. I mean, I guess of all the designers working on the project, you probably had the most trust in Benchmark because you've known them since you were graduating from the Royal College of Art.
Yeah, I mean, there's a kind of cruel sadism in going, oh, I'm so sorry you can't come and see what we're doing. Terrible, it's just impossible. You're just going to have to trust us. However, I mean, I've been very lucky to work with Sean and over a long period of time. And if there was anyone you were going to trust, it is Sean. And you know, I think it's really. I think Sean and I share a sadness at the increasing lack of trust in craftsmanship that has happened over the last century or so. You know, as modernism in the world of architecture kind of came in, that somehow made the lead designer of buildings, certainly, and we're working on a lot of building projects, sort of seem like actually it's not about you craftsmen, we're the people doing all the twiddly, silly stuff on all these buildings. And actually, we just needed a factory to make this clinical thing with, say, a material like, say, asbestos or something like that, rather than, you know, laying of bricks or carving. And I think that the baby got thrown out with the bathwater, that actually it was about our humanity, and that in the functionalist movement, emotion was a function, and the qualities of the material, even the feeling of how it's been worked, and you can feel there are intuitions that are there, and you notice in who reaches and touches something, or if they walk past and go, oh, that's really, really good. And I think we've lost that emotion in many of the new places being made around us, in fact, most. And that does go sort of all the way down, I think, probably to the world of furniture scale as well, where it's sort of, there's been just a general devaluation, and the quantity of people who are proud to say they were craftsmen. I mean, in the United Kingdom and many parts of the world, there were craftspeople everywhere, and they were very judging, very aesthetic-minded people, without having to have gone to art college or studied art history or something like that. And I think there's been this sort of funny imbalance thing. So that's me sort of rambling on, but it was, I mean, I sort of smile because genuinely to be working with a maker who's, wants to do something amazing, it gives you a totally different feeling.
Yeah.
It's not a contract that's being ticked off the list. And so this project came out from the passion of Benchmark and the American Hardwood Export trade organization, and two people thinking what would be amazing. And I think for me it was interesting because I probably wouldn't have been engaged in a project about furniture like a desk in this way. I would have thought a desk, there's loads of desks you can buy, really, do I need to sort of be a performing poodle about what it means? But we were actually in a time where the desks as a tool, this funny tool, I'd not sat in one for so long, since I was 16 doing O-levels. And so it was a funny thing, and suddenly really thinking about what am I sitting on, what are my fingers touching, and these flat half people like we all are now to each other, on these shiny screens, and the sort of sterility of that, and yet humanity, sterility all together, and most people's homes not having studies anymore or offices anymore. And certainly I didn't have a study, it seems like a Victorian notion. But needing privacy and needing to be able to leave children or leave people your other parts of life to try and focus in the way people could. So it felt that the timing, I felt it was a powerful brief, not only for how it would be realized, but also what it meant to make a place that a place of your passion and your life that was your tool, and that there was rethinking or thinking about that worth looking at. And so it was so interesting to have 9 different teams all wrestling around with the immediate experience. So it wasn't the experience of the making, but the experience of sitting in video conferencing and what that meant.
So the brief was to create a table, and you sort of created a table, but you created a system fundamentally. I mean, can you talk us a little bit through your thinking with STEM?
Well, I think we were wrestling a bit because our interest in the studio is ideas, and we were interested to see what is an idea that could apply to more than me and my home, or my collaborators Stuart or Tom's homes, but what was something that was not actually such a personal piece, but could you, by being personal, actually find something that was universal? And I think that we've all spent a lot of time in the old-fashioned workplace. I say old-fashioned, with plasticated desking systems, with plasticated trunking systems underneath the desking system, with cabling systems, and a sort of just a dead placemaking. And yet we've spent so much of our life in the work environment, so often more than people's homes. And it seemed there was rethinking that was maybe valid for the workplace as much as the home place, and the hybridization of those two, and the comedy of, you know, people and their funny efforts to feel at home in their work, which is typified by a sort of pathetic little cactus that they bring and that's half dead, and as cuddly toy, and then the management team come and say, look, this is all really rather tacky, could you get rid of those because the designers wanted a clean desk for a clean image. And so how do people make those are all about emotion, and our design in a way evolved from thinking about some of the research that was done and in the 1980s, and now more and more, in a way, the science of the emotion, of the mental health of people in their places of work. And we've got interested in that at the largest scale, and we're integrating major swathes of nature into the built projects that we're working on. We have 1,000 trees and many thousands of shrubs and a project that generates oxygen for 2,000 people, and will take out 21 tons of carbon from the air when it's finished, in one of our projects in Shanghai. And our cancer care centre that we've worked on recently, that has creates a garden, makes the site greener than it was before the building was there. And so we just got interested in blank walls, blank flooring, the sort of, if you really are spending 8 hours, 9 hours in a room, I mean, I don't know what all the research is around prisoners in cells and the need for getting out of cells, but it really felt that the real issue. So we used the excuse to focus on the leg as almost like a G-clamp, as a thing, rather than caring about the desk. Everyone's desk space is different, wider, narrower, but in a sense, if we could make something that held up your worktop, and I remember hearing how in Amazon they were determined to stay having doors as your desk. It was a door, even though it was more expensive to buy door blanks than to actually get tabletops. It was like, no, the spirit is doors. And it felt we don't need to maybe be so slick. Something can be an object that is used to hold up a work surface, whether it's 100 meters long or 1 meter long, and integrating nature into your desk. There's this thing called attention restoration theory that we've been researching in the studio, which was about cognitive performance in the workplace. And it was finding, and Rachel and Stephen Kaplan in the 1980s had really looked into this, and were finding that exposure to nature for more than 40 seconds every hour or two gave a kind of reset to your mind and allowed your attention to be somewhat restored. And maybe in the old days, people would go for a cigarette to get attention restoration. And but in this time where we all don't smoke, and it's so much more, we thought, well, what if your desk actually, it isn't it's this shape that Thomas thought was a good shape, but actually has a fishbone cactus, a monstera, a Yucatan princess, a lacy tree, a silver thicket, African jasmine, a pencil cactus, and a felt bush. Just thought, that's interesting. And when I'm there, aware how boring I'm being to you, and maybe and you're just in something, to be able to just move your eyes and just have some of the infinite, like when you look out at the sea, there's something infinite, or when you look out into a fire, and when you look into nature, there's something of the infinite. And we'd been looking in China at the way that some of the calligraphy paintings, their job was not to be so definite, but to be infinite and allow your imagination to look in somehow and find a portal in. So I'm sounding a bit dreamy and wishy-washy, but I really am finding there's depth to this.
Well, you ended up kind of creating a kind of mini Kew Gardens that people can work in fundamentally, or that you can work in.
Yes.
And can we talk about the inspiration behind it? Because there's a kind of interesting combination of craft and technology in the making of it, because it was inspired by wooden spoons initially that you have in your house, I believe.
Well, we had some good conversation. It was nice also because Sean wasn't just sort of waiting, like, when are you sending me the drawings? As Sean was like, we're doing it together. So we had conversations together and trying to think. It was a compressed design time. And what I love is those conversations where you're onto something and you're not sure where it's going to go. And I can't remember all our conversations, Sean, but I remember at one point we got excited about African spoons. Like my mother had quite a collection, has quite a collection of the carved spoons. And there seemed to be a freedom to the way they were each unique. And I know that there are sometimes whittling courses where people go and will spend a day or a weekend carving these spoons, and they have personality. And so often I've found in the modern movements, there's such a fear to have personality in things. And so it felt, well, what if each one, just as the contents are very different, what if each one of these legs had some difference? I think I'd love to push that further, actually, but it seemed permission to be, and when you combined the function of needing to clamp atop, hold up something, and have a leg that had some adjustability, and potentially even let cabling come up and through, it seemed that there was a whole lot of interesting functions that didn't drive it to be a box.
Yeah.
It drove a shape that wasn't going to be that, because you're needing to deal with the forces of clamping the tabletop. And we chose glass just in order to focus on the idea, which was about legs. And it wasn't about the tabletop.
So Sean, can I turn to you a bit about the process of making this piece? Because there's not that much symmetry in it, right? And it went through a biophilic program, I understand. So this thing isn't turned on a lathe. It's a much more complicated process.
There's a total lack of symmetry. I mean, they were drawn through a CAD program, but then the CAD program was run through a biomimicry parameter, which sort of randomized the geometry and actually caused an interesting challenge for us, because what started out as like 63,000 lines of code to be interpreted into machine code actually became millions and millions and millions and millions of lines of code, because every instruction because we were always going to make this on a CNC machine.
Right. So
every instruction then got broken down into sort of, almost microns movements of the machine head. It therefore necessitated some considerable rethinking. We had to go and buy new computers and stuff just to have enough computing power to do it. The result of it is that there are no surfaces that are the same as each other. You know, I don't, you know, it's a constantly varying set of surfaces. And it gives a very satisfying and natural feel, which is sort of ironic considering the amount of technology that was required to recreate nature. I mean, look, there's nothing new about the inventiveness and us respecting the inventiveness of nature. In fact, one of my absolute favorite quotations, I was really lucky a long time ago to work on a sculpture with Edoardo Palazzi, the head of invention, it's called. And on the base of it is written an inscription by Leonardo da Vinci, which is one of my favorite quotes ever. It's, though human genius in its various inventions with various instruments may answer the same end, it'll never find an invention more beautiful, or more simple, or more direct than nature. Because in her inventions, nothing is lacking and nothing superfluous. And you know, that's 550 years ago, or 500, more than 500 years ago anyway. So then I've always looked to nature for inspiration. And when we're struggling to answer something, I would kind of turn and see, well, did nature have an answer to this? That's one of the great things about being a woodworker, is that we're dealing in a material that nature had worked out so long before man was even, you know, a tadpole swimming around in the water. I mean, we're with a material that's been really, really well worked out by nature. And it is, I think it's a material that, I think there's no material on earth with which man has a greater affinity. I think, you know, it's our oldest relationship. Our first homes, our first tools, our first weapons, our first heat, everything came from wood. And I think it's a relationship that I'm very blessed as a woodworker to you know, have as such a central part of my life. And to come back to Thomas's piece, which really created something that was wholly natural, even if the way of making it was quite unnatural. We were sort of really trying to create something out of a natural material. And Thomas, I remember so well our early discussions when you'd been sitting for however many weeks it was by then in your new house, you know, surrounded with harsh and man-made materials, and you were just screaming for nature. You know, you were just you didn't have the benefit that I did living in the country of, you know, gardens and fields and trees and woods. And I really remember how you were yearning, as indeed all the 9 designers, every single one of them, sought to greater or lesser extents to bring nature through the wood into their homes for this project. And that was really, you know, they were all very, very focused on the use of the material as an expression of nature in their homes. So look, we've done the creativity and the craftsmanship. Can we talk a little bit about the sustainability at this point? I mean, David, you measured the carbon output for each piece. I mean, this was obviously an incredibly important element of the project.
Yeah, I just before you do that, I'd like to bring my quote to the table, because I think it's relevant from what Thomas and Sean have said. And that's one from Frank Lloyd Wright. And he said, nature is the inspiration for all ornamentation. Wood is universally beautiful to man. It's the most humanly intimate of all materials. And I think, you know, I start a lot of my lectures about wood with that, because that's the emotional attachment that we don't quite know why. I don't think it's all linked now to the idea of well-being and you know, feeling more relaxed. And then of course we're beginning to learn more about the health benefits of wood as well. But that emotional attachment is very deep and is just there, that link with nature. So whenever you challenge on wood projects, you get a marvelous response, I think, because of that. So we're very lucky, we think, to have the best material out there, both, performance, its look, its feel, and that, linked to emotion. But in today's world, we need to be a little bit more scientific and practical. And it's over 10 years ago now, when looking at how we positioned our materials in the whole discussion about sustainability, environmental impact. I am a wood scientist, that was my training. So I have that kind of scientific, analytical approach to things. And, I wanted to find science as a way to be reassured that we were doing the right thing, and that by promoting a material in all different parts of the world, from one set of forests, that we weren't having a huge environmental impact, or that we could justify it or calculate it. And discovering the world of life cycle and finding experts that could help put us all that research together. We did that initial fact-finding and peer-reviewed research. So we collected data from sawmills. We analysed the impacts of forestry, drying the wood, extracting the wood. If you have natural regenerating forests, you use very little pesticides, and so the impacts are very low. And then we discovered that in terms of things like carbon footprint, moving bulk around by sea freight and sea fuel has a far less impact than road or even train. So the material in Europe, and you go, oh, I use local wood. It comes from Europe. Well, where in Europe? It could be 1,000 miles by truck, but it's still classified as Europe. Whereas in fact, you can bring containers over from the States and use them in Europe with less transport impact. So it began to tell us a lot of really interesting things. And so we knew or know what the impact of any unit of our material is when it arrives at a factory gate. What we've learned by doing these collaborative projects and introducing life cycle into them and asking, our collaborators like Benchmark to collect processing data, we then learn the impacts of the products we make. And it's a real eye-opener, because you look around you, in your office, your home, you go into a shop, and you realize there's all these materials, everything has an impact. But we have a huge advantage, because every item in your space that is made from wood is automatically a carbon store. And I think we need to embrace that a little bit more. And I'm sure consumers and our clients and, would latch on and be interested to learn more about that. So you're not just, Sean isn't just making, beautifully well-made design, but he's selling and making carbon stores.
Yeah. So it's interesting, because for Thomas's piece, and I'm going to read, so you'll excuse me if my eyes dip from the camera for a moment, but it used the same amount of CO2 as a 2,000 kilometre drive, and is equal to the carbon emissions of an average European over an 11-day period. That said, it would take only 1.6 seconds for the 320 kilograms of American maple used to manufacture stem to be replaced by regrowth in the forest, which is quite an interesting statistic. I mean, Thomas, from a designer's point of view, does this affect your thinking about a design, I wonder?
It was very exciting to have this. In the world of architecture that we're working with, there has been a greater, much more data that we can work with on each of our projects, and at the scale of the whole project and the teams, and that's something, but you don't expect that at the scale of furniture. And so it was really interesting to see, to some extent, more data than we would expect on one of our building projects to be able to get on about a desk. So I found it very educational. I think it was something that I would like to now look at for many more of the projects. But I think it's for me, it was a very useful learning process. This. I don't know, Grant, if you've seen this kind of data before.
No. It's extraordinary, actually.
It takes a little bit of effort. I mean, well, in some cases, to get a full environmental product declaration, it takes a lot of effort and recording of data and verifying your sources. But we now do it on quite a lot of our products. We do provide full environmental product declarations, and on even more of our products, we can provide life cycle assessments. So we can say, you know, that chair is equivalent to, you know, 4 or 40 kilograms of carbon. In fact, I mean, the beauty, as David said, of making in wood is that, of course, not only is our raw material a carbon positive material in the first place, but also all the waste material we use is carbon displacement as fuel. So we heat our entire workshops, 30,000 square feet of workshops on our waste wood, and our electricity supply is all from 100% renewable. So as a business, we're able to contribute very low carbon contributions to our products. And I do think it's inevitable. I mean, it's absolutely, when I go and buy my carton of Oatly and it tells me that, you know, it's 0.6 of a kilogram of carbon, come on, dairy industry, tell us what yours is, what your litre of milk is, then the pressure's on for everyone to start declaring. You know, the cost in money is one thing, and the cost in carbon is something that we're all just going to have to get very used to thinking about.
Yeah.
I think Sean's making a really good point about data, is that we haven't had data at our fingertips like we're now starting to on our building projects, and it's been brilliant working with Google. It's been possible to get huge amounts of data on all the materials we're going to use, on the energy we're using to put it together, on the energy we will be using to run and maintain, and the life cycle of that project. When you've got that information at your hand, it still comes down to the judgment and this judgment thing. But you're making this call, because you can argue that it's better to do nothing. You know, do absolutely nothing ever again. Make nothing. No lorry drive anywhere. No ship go anywhere. But as David says, there's also, if you can create things that people will love, that mean that oxygen is created, but it doesn't get thrown away at the end. So it seems that love is a key part of sustainability at the other end, from the creation, is that if you don't make something that people will love, then it won't have been worth it, because then it's going to be rotting or burnt and creating carbon again. So the key is making things that connect with people and matter. And I think that's so important. And we can get caught up in the need to do this and do that, and not step back and say, but is it really connecting with people? Because that's the ultimate best thing you can do, because then people won't want to demolish that building and will cherish that piece of furniture and give it to their children or their friends, and it will keep self-generating purpose.
It's why, Grant, we talk a lot about, and Thomas is absolutely right, in a sense, we want people to use less wood, but lots more wood. And what we mean by that is within designs, make products last longer. So that unit of material has a long life function. It's storing carbon, it's giving pleasure. I love the idea, of love as well as good quality design, and I think particularly with wood that gets easy, to be able to do that. But what we're trying to do on a global scale is say, don't be frightened of using wood. It's your renewable material. And as Sean said, it's the only material that you can work with in quite a natural, low impact way. It's also a fuel. So there are offsetting opportunities. And we have vast areas of forest around the world that is available, that is regenerating, so we could consume more in terms of that global mix of materials. And if you start thinking the built environment and architecture, this huge opportunity, looking at the material carbon impacts of the built environment, as well as the energy and the function, and introducing plants and nature. So all these things have to be worked out together. We like it because we can on furniture projects, you can scale all that down and do all that experiment quickly and produce the data. And, you know, we learn every time we do one of these projects, you know, and each piece has, you know, different aspects to it that test that science and that data and those conclusions.
We're coming to the end of our hour, chaps. So Thomas, just to kind of conclude, I get the sense that STEM isn't just for your house. Do you see this product having a future elsewhere?
That's our interest. That was our interest from the beginning. And we are now looking at how we can take that, the idea that was there, and push it to the next stage that's actually a more useful product. But at the moment, I mean, anyone could come and order one of these legs and buy the rest from IKEA, or buy 20, and with Sean we could make those. But in the bigger application, I think there's a serious thing that emerged through what we were working on that I think has a place in the world of furniture and workplace, and the hybrid now. The exciting, I mean, within this tragedy and this sort of strange time we've had, our increased awareness of our humanity, and that I think is going to come out through the workplace that can't get away with being lazy and plasticated anymore, and the home that can't get away with thinking it's just a little bolt hole that you go home to and sort of hang out a little bit at weekends in. So I think that our place is becoming more human more than ever, and this kind of idea can be a contributor to more meaningful placemaking.
Very good, very good. Well, that's a lovely place to leave it. Thank you very much to all the panel. And just to mention that Connected is on at Design Centre Chelsea Harbour until the 31st of January. Do take the time and trouble to go and have a look. It is a fascinating, fascinating project. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, Simon.